to start. So we're kind of on Rev 2. So right now, I'm super excited to talk about this. And just for everyone who's there, I'm just excited because I always love talking about investing. And I've always am excited about talking about how we can invest and make a lot of money. And what really gets me excited is we're kind of at a stage in the market where we've never seen an opportunities like what we see today in front of us. And what I'm talking about is stuff that is bigger and better than a lot of things that are out there on the market. So I've actually, today, I am rehearsing a class that we're going to be producing. So I've actually even prepared some slides. And what I first want to start with is, a little bit about ourselves and everything like that. But more importantly, we want to talk about, what's wealth. And I'd love to get your opinion, Courtney. How do you define wealth? I mean, I know a lot of people define wealth differently. Do you have any thoughts on this? Or, what makes you wealth? Is it happiness? Is it health?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. It's happiness, it's wealth, it's the ability. I think it kind of all encapsulates together. It's the ability to do what you want when you want. And I think that kind of does a marriage of between money and health and kind of just opportunity. When you don't have your health, you can't just go anywhere because you have to worry about your health. Same thing if you don't have money, you can't just do whatever you want because you're limited by the funds that you have. So it's kind of all of those things together is what I consider to be wealth.
Definitely. No, that's a great definition. And I know for a lot of people out there, and if anyone who's on, feel free to comment, let us know what you think. There's many ways of looking at it. Some people say it's happiness. Some people say it's peace of mind. Ultimately, there's many different ways. I like to look at it from a perspective of net worth, and it's not a matter of how much the net worth, but we all have, if I were to say, that number in our mind that gives us that freedom, right? That health, that happiness, and that wellness on that side. And the key to remember, the way I look at it is it's different for every circumstance. For some people, and I don't know what your thoughts are, but buying a house means I'm wealthy. For other people, it's just paying off debt. For others, it could be not having to work again. I mean, what do you think? What for you is freedom and wealth, Courtney? Like, do you want to not work? Go sit on a warm beach? What are your thoughts on that?
I think biggest thing is that wealth looks like to me is opportunity. So I think I don't talk about debt this way all of the time, but sometimes I think that can be very limiting, almost like a noose around your neck, kind of like chains on your ankles, or basically kind of forcing you to be somewhere or do something that you don't want to do. So I think that's where kind of debt finds a lot of us. So being debt free, so kind of basically paying off debt, but then on the other side, not having to work again is a big deal also. So being debt free on one side, but then also not having to, do a 9 to 5, but also doing what I love. There are certain things that I love to do. And I'm like, okay, I can do this even if I didn't get paid. But I think those are the things that I think about when I think about being wealthy. It's not having to work and then also having no debt.
Well, so that's an interesting one. And let's discuss this a little bit because there's that term, right? Good debt and bad debt. So you could actually not have to work again if you had the right kind of debt. Maybe you have real estate, cash flow properties. And in some cases, if you don't, what do you think, right? Should you pay off everything, or would it be better to actually have a little bit of debt and enhance that cash flow and basically put your money to work?
So
there's no right or wrong answer.
I actually should clarify that. When I mean by being debt free, I mean consumer debt. Like credit cards. Anything that's what I would credit cards or a car or something like that, depreciating asset. I can't get anything from that. I've already spent the money on the credit card. I've already, basically spent the money on the car, and the car over time depreciates over time, unless the value does, unless it's some kind of special fancy whatever car. So it's kind of those types of things. When I'm looking at non-consumer debt, when I'm looking at business debt, or investing debt, to put it in different terms, that's completely different. So if I have multiple mortgages on a property, if I'm doing BRRRR, which is, buy, rent, buy, rehab, rent, refinance, when I'm looking at that and then repeat, then that's a different kind of debt because, I'm using the refinance to actually leverage to get into another property. So that's a different type of debt.
And for everyone who's out there that doesn't know, Courtney is actually a very knowledgeable real estate attorney. So the ins and outs, I'm sure, about all that sort of stuff and how people go about doing this and everything on that side. Yeah. Now, just about me, I guess, personally, I look at, for me, wealth is I want to take profits that I have and I want to put them into cash flowing assets that would eventually replace my income. And for me, wealth is getting to that point where I have enough cash flowing assets, in my case, real estate, that lets me live off my day-to-day income expenses. And then everything else is icing on the cake and I can go do whatever I want or explore different ideas or do everything on that. And the reason why this is important is, I'll tell you a personal story on my end. In my case, it was around probably 10 years ago when I actually hit that spot. But it's not like I hit that spot, and it wasn't dependent on how much money or income I was making. What was key to me actually was understanding, the concept of money. And for me, I had what's called my aha money moment when I realized, hey, I can work and I can work hard and I can bust my butt and everything and I can go make more money. But the amount of money that I'm making on an active side doesn't correlate with my passive income or my investments and my feelings of freedom that I have. I don't know if you've had that impression before or anything. I'm at an age where I've had some major ups and I've had some down years, and it's life, right?
Right. No, I completely agree. And I think you make a very valid point about active versus investing income or passive income. Once I really understood the tax code and I understood that if I worked for my money, I paid more taxes, that was my aha moment. So my function was to move as much as my earned income into passive income streams. So I was going to get taxed less on the gains that I had from those passive income streams. So that was my aha moment. I was like, oh no, I don't want to work because you're going to tax me more. Because if I have capital gains, my long-term capital gains, I'm going to be taxed significantly less, in some cases 20% less. And that's more money in my pocket.
Wow. Now, I'm curious to ask you a question, because for people who don't know, Courtney, your mission, or you spend a lot of time on educating people, and specifically educating people on money. So money is one of those topics. It's a little taboo, isn't it? Or, I mean, you run into this more than I do, right? On that front. So what do people run into when you start talking to them about money? Is it a bad thing? Do they tell you to shut up? Do they just look at you funny?
I think it's the kind of the blank stare. It's kind of the clamming up. And it's not necessarily that it's a sense of embarrassment. A lot of people are kind of like, I don't want you to judge me by my poor money management decisions, or things like that. And I kind of get that, but the way I combat that is I talk about my own money management and my own problems that I've had, even, quote unquote, knowing better. I was licensed as a financial advisor in 2003. But if you know me personally, I almost was not admitted to the bar in 2013 because of my credit. So again, years later, you're kind of going, oh, doesn't she know better? And I mean, of course I did. Now, I was laid off in 2009 as a financial advisor working for Merrill Lynch because, the market crashed in 2008 and Merrill Lynch was purchased by Bank of America. So it kind of changed, and I went to law school. So kind of those things, those dynamics did change. And one of the things that I learned is that you have to learn how to adjust your income. If you do downsize, you have to downsize everything. So I give you that story to say, once I share those stories and I share my experience in working through that and getting out of that, and, getting to well over a 700 credit score from being there, from being almost denied not to practice in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to getting well over a 700 credit score, people kind of relate to you differently and better.
It's great that you brought that up, and I want to thank you for actually being honest and showing vulnerability, because a lot of people, I think, we are afraid to talk about money because there's a level of shame. And I mean, I can only speak for myself. I remember, for people who've tuned in, what we're talking about is, how to invest $1,000 and hopefully turn it into $1 million and create generational wealth. The first step that I had to learn was I had to not be afraid to use money as a tool and recognize. And the key here is that money, it's a tool, and done right, used right, the tool can be great. Used wrongly, it can be really, I mean, let's put it bluntly, it can be a mess. Yeah. I mean, in my side, I have had ups and downs. There was a point, and this was around 2007, where, I don't know if you know this, but I started my first business in college. So I was 19. At the age of 25, I was on the Inc. 500. So the business was doing over 10 million a year, and life was good, right? I'm making money, and I mean, I'm not in any way like that sports star or anything like that, but I probably spent pretty poorly. And literally, if you could imagine, I was 27 or 28. And we had a house in the suburbs that was probably, 2 acres of property, 7,000 square feet. I had a 3-story condo in the city and everything like that. So I had a pretty big monthly nut to cover, right? And then 2007, 2008 hits, and I lost $1 million that year. So not only is it like, oh my gosh, I'm not making money, but then it comes down, and I was in a bad spot where literally it's not like, it's one thing if it's just, oh, I can cut expenses and, I just have to tighten my belt. But when you've got mortgages, when you've got liabilities and stuff like that, you just can't get it. It's not that easy to get out. And I mean, it's tough to say it because no one wants to admit, especially when you're, the people think you're making money, or the company's doing well, or, your friends think you're, in this nice place, or you're driving that nice car. It's really hard to say, oh my gosh, you look at your checking account, or you say, oh my gosh, where's that money coming in next month? Because I've got to cover this and all that sort of stuff. But what I wanted to state was, for both of us, we've all had our ups and downs. It's really realizing that money is a tool, and like all tools, whether it's a knife, right? I could use a knife for good things. I can cut food with my knife or whatnot, right? Or I could stab someone with a knife. That could be used for a bad thing. Fire is another thing, right? Fire is what created mankind. On the other hand, fire can burn things down, or fire can, everything can be used good or bad, right? Protein's the other thing. I love eating healthy proteins, or I love eating my fish, I love eating my steak, but I could eat too much and get cholesterol. And the key here of what I found is with money, used properly, right, it makes something beautiful, but used wrong, it makes a mess. And more importantly, though, is I think what people need to understand, or what I've learned, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, is for me, my big aha moment first was something bad happened, so I had to figure out how money was. But then the second aha moment was realizing that money is not a physical good. And I'd be curious, if people are watching, if you want to comment or ask questions, if you need more clarification. What I found was money's it's like energy. Like, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it doesn't just, it's not there. It's not like a gold. It's not an asset. It doesn't disappear. It just transfers. Does that make any sense to you, Courtney? Or
definitely. I mean, it's essential is I work, 3 hours and I get paid $1,000. So the person I work for, the entity I work for, they pull their $1,000 and give it to me. It doesn't just kind of pop out of nowhere. And then I turn around and take my $1,000 and I invest it, or I spend it, or I do a combination of both. But again, it's going somewhere. It's being recycled.
Exactly.
So no, definitely, I agree.
And the key here is to realize, just like how we said, it's a tool, it's energy. That energy can be transferred into good things, Maybe I can transfer that money into investments that then earn more money for me, that work for me, or I can transfer that into bad things. Like one of the bad things I bought, and, in hindsight, we all look back and we laugh. When I was 28, I bought a really nice BMW. So I've got my $80,000 car, but, I didn't pay cash for it. And what I had was, that was $1,500 a month, that you got to pay for the thing. And then the thing to realize too, is when you transfer your money in the bad spot, it wasn't just the car payment. Well, now you got to pay to get it cleaned. You got to park in the nice place. You can't just park it on the street in the city. You got to valet it, and, like everything, that's just how it is. And the key though, I think for a lot of people, and what I realized was, when I realized that money was just like energy, there's a giving side and there's a receiving side. And the key to really understanding, at least for me, how to use my money, how the money flows, is we want to be on the receiving side of money. And more importantly, how do we be on the receiving side? Well, the starting point is to be on the receiving side, we want to invest. But more importantly, we want to be on the right side of the wealth transfers. And I know a lot of people who've tuned in the past, you realize that, hey, I love to talk history. And right now, we'll talk about the different points of wealth transfer. But the key to be mindful of is if you realize that money's like energy, if you're on the receiving side of it, you then just have to be positioning yourself to be on the right side of receiving that money. Now, some people, I don't know if you've ever had that experience. Some people, they say, well, I had a bad experience once, so I'm just going to close my eyes, shut my mouth. I just want to sit out altogether. I don't know if have you met people like that, or have you ever been in that way? Or
I have. I've seen it a lot, and it really stinks. It's like, hey, I've gotten burned before. I'm never going to touch fire. But yeah, you got burned before because you weren't using the tool properly. But the problem is that you need fire to live. So now you've kind of cut off a life source, or, let's bring it down. You're just basically cutting off your nose to spite your face, because yes, you did have a bad experience, but you have to learn from the experience for that not to happen again, or else you end up cutting yourself off from a good experience and basically making more money. And I've seen that just happen all the time. They're like, someone's like, hey, I was investing in the stock market and I lost a lot of money. I'm never going to do that again. So I'm going to put my money in the bank. And I'm like, okay, so you're going to lose money because the bank doesn't keep up with inflation. So the $1,000 that you put in the bank today is going to be worth less, even with the quote interest you get. It's going to be worth less in terms of buying power 5 years from now. So you're going to say, hey, I had this bad experience in the stock market. Instead of saying, what did I do to get myself a bad experience in the stock market? How can I fix that? You just stay away from it completely. So then you end up going to something that's inferior, and then you end up losing.
Oh, definitely. Actually, we've got a comment from Chase. Chase is saying, think about it. Money is a piece of paper on a receipt. So we want to use money to create more money. And he's done by using money just to impress people.
Oh yeah,
I think that's great. I mean, that's a great comment from somebody. And speaking of which, let's talk about the stock market, right? So we're here to talk about how to invest money and turn it into more. Well, step one is you've got to play the game,
right?
Right. So we got to be in the market, and this is the S&P. And it's what you said, right? If I've just been in the S&P, and even though there's been ups and downs and everything, over the last 3 years, the S&P's still done pretty well on that front. I think we're up almost, last year it was up 20% and everything. And it's important for everyone who's listening, it's important to invest in your financial education, which is why, if you're still listening in, why you're here. And what you'll find a lot of times is in life, if you just kind of shift how you look at things, like, I'm not looking at the market, oh my gosh, I'm down 5% today, or I'm down 2% tomorrow, or I'm up 5% and I'm rich or I'm poor. If you're able to step back and look at the forest instead of the trees, that will really help in building wealth. Now, moving forward, the question is, 20% or the S&P 500 is good, but more importantly, we want to look at, how do we actually invest $1,000 and turn it into much bigger dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands or even millions so that we can create generational wealth. So I'm a big believer in history. And this is a quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I would love to get your opinion. But what I have found, and the way I have found to be the most successful way for me to invest, whether I'm investing my time or I'm investing my dollars or everything on cents, is catching those innovation cycles. Mm-hmm. So if we look at history and everything, right, innovation cycles, there were the railroads, there were automobiles, there were computers, there was then the rise of the mobile phone, there was the rise of the internet, and now there are new cycles that are starting. That's kind of how I like to look at things. I'm not sure, what your thoughts are on this, Courtney, if you are, if you see these trends.
I definitely see the trends. I don't think I've ever looked at it that way in terms of innovation cycles, but definitely it's certainly on point. It's a definite way to look at things, is that what was the old way of doing things and how have we changed it? So I'm looking at it. So we have the substitution. So like it's something stops working, and then what have we done to replace it? And that's kind of like how life works. I mean, you have a great thing with the railroads, the automobiles, then computers, mobile phones, and internet technology, how all of that kind of, especially railroads and automobiles, like how they replaced each other kind of in the way the United States is growing across the world. But then it's also interesting to see how railroads are kind of making their way back, but they're kind of coming back with the way we think about like air travel. So we have the bullet trains that go super fast on it, but it's still a train. So it's like looking at that innovation that way also. And then here's my question. What I like to do generally is I say, what enabled this change? What technology or what process was initiated for this change to actually happen? Sometimes that's technology, sometimes that's a policy, sometimes that's just kind of something being flipped on its head. Sometimes, I guess, nature.
No, I agree. And I think it's good to look at it, when we talk about trends and cycles and everything, and we'll get into, for people who are in kind of the bigger cycles that are coming on that we see, I think this is where that money is energy really ties in together from my perspective, right? So let's just think of energy, and let's just talk about Uber, for example, right? Uber is a innovation cycle or an innovation shift in the taxi driving industry. So if you look at it, right, before Uber, the money was there, and the money was in the taxi drivers. And the money was in the taxi medallion, because if you had the medallion, you were then able to drive that taxi and everything, and you basically had a lock because there were a limited number of medallions out there and people had to wait in line. I don't know, I'm kind of curious now that you bring that up, but like there was, I remember reading an article on taxi medallion pricing. And you can see, let me see. Yeah, look at that, right? I don't know if you can see this, see my screen.
There we go.
A taxi medallion in New York in 2013 was $1 million. And as of 2018, that same medallion is now worth $200,000, right? And that, I mean, if you want to talk about innovation cycles or anything, a perfect example, what's the difference, right? Before, the people with the money were the guys with the taxi medallions. And now what's happened is Uber has come in, and Uber has taken almost that $800,000 in value per taxi medallion. And if we looked at, Uber's not public, so we can't look at that. But if you look at, call it the valuation of Uber, basically that money the money that was sitting in the value of the taxi medallion has now transferred over into the value of Uber as a company.
Right.
And I think this is the key for people who are looking to invest. I mean, you can definitely invest in the S&P, and ideally anyone who's investing, we highly recommend asset allocation. So don't, put all your money in on red, right? That's a whole nother thing. But there's always a portion of the portfolio that we want to be able looking out for these trends. And if we can look at these trends and we can catch these trends, there's a lot of gravy to be made, and we can be on the receiving end of that. So I'd love to get your kind of opinion. Let's just talk about some trends. So, you're an investor, you go by the IV investor. Now, people probably don't realize that the IV investor started before the current trend. But why don't you talk about, some of the trends you're looking at, and let's just talk about the disruption and where you see the dollar shifting.
I really, and you know how I am about my law, is that I really try to follow where policy is going. So where policy moves, I move. I'm like, oh, policy is moving. Let's go with the policy, because again, that's kind of your, that's going to be pretty much I'll call your substitution, your where the money is going to start flowing. So what we talked about last week when we talked about the hemp bill, the hemp bill has opened up hemp to be manufactured and I shouldn't say manufactured, but grown in the United States. I don't want to say freely because that's not quite right, but it's actually being able to be a real marketable crop in the United States with a little bit regulation, but still it's about looking where that money is going. So that's kind of where I start with my trends. I look at my policies. Also, a couple of years ago, and I thought this was really, really interesting a couple of years ago. President Obama stated that he was, let me clarify. The DOJ said they were no longer using private prisons. And you're like, okay, that's wonderful. However, understanding policy is that in all private prison stocks that day, I think it was like summer 2016, they dropped astronomically, about 65% in one trading day. And everybody, that's the end of private prisons. I said, no, 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 no. If you know anything about private prisons, and this is again, understanding policy, is that the main driver of private prisons on the federal level is ICE, which is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So if you understood that, then you knew that it was a artificial drop. And so I help my mom with her retirement, and I have since she started her retirement. So I had a conversation with her. I said, how do you feel about this? And she's like, I'm not really jumping up and down about investing in private prisons, but if you do see an opportunity, I want you to get in. I don't want you to get out. So in about 4 months, and then also Trump was elected, so that did pop up this also.
So you're raking it in on the private prisons.
I did. And I got out. And I had to, because I just couldn't really get down, but I understood the market, and I understood that that there was kind of this artificial drop that happened in the market, and that sometimes you have to exploit it. But I didn't want to exploit people. So I was like, I'm not staying in long. And my mom was okay with that. And she's also, retired, but at the time she was retiring, or she just retired. So she was like, let's try to get as much money as we can. But again, it's about, like I say, I follow policy because that's where you're going to find those opportunities. Like I just read everything and I'm like, oh, wait, that makes sense. Or, oh, that doesn't really follow. Let's see what more I can find out. So
that's brilliant to catch. I mean, because you're right. When everyone out there, everyone knows the private prison system. Let's not even get started there, right? That's like investing in Monsanto.
Right.
Let's just, destroy society. And I'm sure on your end, there's probably other ramifications in terms of how you feel about the prison system or your community, friends and things like that. That's a whole nother mess.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to touch that one because that's just going to get me in trouble. But the fact that you saw that and then you realize that, oh my gosh, it's not just, okay, everyone hears the news and everyone's selling and they're like, oh, we got to go get out. But you're like, hold on, there's immigration. And prisons are more about immigration. And then now, did you predict that? Did you think that Trump would win, or were you feeling?
Actually, I did. And the reason why, and let me tell you why, is that I was watching, on the Ivy Investor, I did a piece on Brexit, because remember, Brexit happened that summer.
And you're right. And no one thought Brexit would happen. And it happened.
Exactly. But that's what I really was like, wait a second. I saw that same sentiment in the United States. And I was like, oh, this is not good. But I did see the possibility that Trump was going to win. And there was a guy, I forgot what his name is. He predicts presidential elections, like almost to the.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that or hearing that. I think it was like he's like the presidential whisperer or whatever, right? His seashells work perfectly.
Exactly. And he was predicting Trump. And I was like, this guy has never been wrong. I'm looking at Brexit. We thought Brexit wasn't going to happen. And I heard the same sentiment. We were listening to the commentary of the the British citizens about how they felt, and they felt like immigration and this is our place. And I was like, oh, this sounds just like America. And I said, oh, this is not going to be good. So I definitely saw that that I felt like Trump was going to win. I didn't know that Trump was going to win, and then in turn it was going to prop up stocks even more. But I also, we talked about how history does repeat itself. I did take a look at kind of, because I look at Trump like the Nixon administration, and I did look at some of the trends that were going on during that time. So I do see some real life parallels there. So I'm not a historian. I mean, I'm an attorney by trade, but we kind of follow history because we talk about precedents or judicial precedent. So that's kind of what I look at also.
Wow. So now, I guess, I don't know if you're still in those prison stocks, but with this whole border wall stuff going on, I mean, now is that a good thing for that trend, or I don't know. I don't know anything about that. So
no, and I literally got out. I want to say February. It's either February or January of 17. I got out. Like I just was just like, no, I'm out. I'm cool. I'm out. I doubled my money. I over doubled my money, and I just got out. I just because I'm not what I call myself a social investor, but I am not deaf to what goes on and how things operate. And I just I can't be okay with just making money off of something that I just conceptually don't agree with.
yeah, no, I hear you, but still, I'm going to give everyone who's listening in, let's give like a mad heart or a like to Courtney. Doubled her money. Got in, got out, knew what she was doing. That's awesome. Now that is great. So let's actually dive in. You've developed a lot of expertise. Now, as the IV investor, obviously people think wink, wink, haha, right? All about the good green stuff, but you've developed a lot of this expertise. So let's talk about, what are the trends you see? Are there regulatory trends? Are there policy trends? Where is this disruption coming? Or let's just discuss it, because I've got some ideas, but I really want to hear your perspectives.
So I think I alluded to some of it earlier when I was talking about the Farm Bill. So let's talk about, we talked about it last week, but this gets me so excited. So before 2014, there was no legalized or legal way to grow hemp or marijuana in the United States. It just wasn't. As much as states were kind of allowing that, California has been in the medicinal marijuana game since 1996, but it wasn't necessarily what we would call federally legal. But in 2014, President Obama signed the Farm Bill, which allowed a pilot program of hemp. So industrial hemp, if people don't know, it's marijuana or cannabis. I should really be very clear here. It's cannabis with 0.3% of THC or less. That's what hemp is. And hemp is actually grown. It's a foodstuff. You can make hemp oil, you can do whatever you do with it. But there's a lot of things that you can do with hemp. Use this fiber, but also you can get your what we call medicinal CBD from, or we can get CBD, what everybody kind of gets really excited about. But now, in 2018, the Farm Bill actually legalized the ability for hemp to be grown legally. So what that causes, that's a policy change. So it basically allows hemp businesses to flourish. So I thought that was a really big thing on the policy side. In terms of, Canada kind of beat everybody to the punch. So I think Canada has to be mentioned here because they have been in the medical marijuana space since 2001. And then in 2018, they legalized recreational marijuana. They were the first kind of industrialized country, to do that. So you're like, okay, great. But what that's doing, it's kind of, so now you have these major players in Canada kind of trying to find their space in the United States. And what I'm starting to see companies that were cannabis companies overall. They had hemp and they were working on marijuana. They're starting to kind of section their businesses off and basically allow their hemp business to really flourish now that the policy allows them to do so. And now you're starting to see companies coming down, specifically cannabis growth companies coming down from Canada. And now they have set up shop in Southern New York on a hemp farm. So again, the biggest marijuana or cannabis company in the world has now come into New York to actually do business there. So that's really different. So again, it's that policy is driving business. So I think that's really what I'm seeing across the board. And I also think that policy that people are changing their mind about marijuana. They're changing their thoughts and what they feel is what marijuana is. So that's changing kind of how we look at it. And I think it's going to start pushing the policy for more legalization. I mean, we look at and kind of looking at history, talking about history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. But we're also looking at, we talk about prohibition of alcohol and how that lasted for about 13 years. And now we have cannabis that is pretty much following the same prohibition path. And now we're starting to look at, it's basically been prohibitive directly since 1970. But kind of prohibitive measures were put in place in 1937. So we're looking at almost 70 years of just kind of like really hardcore prohibition against cannabis. So now we're starting to roll out of that. And that's where those companies are going to start really making moves. And you're going to start seeing that's where the money's being made. Because we can look at alcohol companies, more specifically, you look at, Constellation Brands. Constellation Brands has a huge stake in Canopy growth. But Constellation Brands is doing amazingly, and they are a huge liquor manufacturer. Corona, there's a couple of big names that they have, but again, that kind of liquor and all those vices kind of do really, really well in the market. So I love that you have this general market S&P versus the green rush. Yeah.
Well, that's the question. How do I take my $1,000 and turn it into $1 million? Now, like I said, if that's all you have, don't bet it all on the farm.
Right.
But the reality here is, right, the first thing is you got to play the game, right? You've got to be in the S&P. You got to be in the market. Mm-hmm. But then when you look at it, if you can catch the trend, and well, there's a few things. First is, I like how what you said. I find I have to be emotionless. Because when the trend is out there and everyone's already talking about it, so like if you look at it, and what I've highlighted here, if you guys can see, this is Canopy Growth Corporation, the company you were talking about. This is probably the leader on the marijuana stocks. And we can literally see these bumps, right? This is beginning of 2018 when California legalized. This was, this bump right here was probably, beginning of 2017. Maybe there were some ballot initiatives. I don't remember, what happened there. This right here, this big bump here, that was the beginning when Canada legalized and the whole thing jumped. And I think the key to be mindful of, though, is when you've heard about this, like, it's already too late, right? So would you buy Canopy Growth? I'm not saying I wouldn't buy Canopy Growth. I mean, there probably is some long-term upside, but, I think the valuation's a little bit on the high end. I probably wouldn't, I think it's a little pricey. I'm looking for the next thing in terms like I want to be where the puck. I think that's a Wayne Gretzky quote. I want to skate to where the puck's going to be. Right. And when you're talking about this hemp and everything on that side, I mean that's great, right? Hemp just got legalized, or it didn't get legalized, but there was a regulatory change. And last time we were talking, you were telling me all the details. There's a lot of things I'm skipping over on that side, but there are some regulatory changes. And the question now is, where are we going on the hemp, with hemp? What's the cycle going to? What's coming up next? Where's the disruption coming from? So let's talk about that. Where do you think the major disruption points come from with hemp? Is it just CBD? Is there more to it? Is it, let's chat.
I think it's going to be CBD. I think it's kind of going to be also the ancillary things as these programs and products become more mainstream. What's going to start happening is that the FDA and regulatory is going to require testing. So I like talking about companies that already have places in testing. Waters Company, I believe they're out of Boston, Massachusetts. They do a lot of testing and a lot of extraction. So they do the extraction from the plant, and they also do testing in terms of purity, and then also looking at kind of heavy metals or any contaminants that may be in the process. But as this becomes more of a mainstream play, you're going to see a lot more regulation, and you're going to see a lot of these companies relying on these other companies, a lot of these mainstream companies, mainstream cannabis hemp companies that are going to be relying on testing to be done because they're going to have to be compliant. Because once something goes mainstream, here comes the federal government. And they're a little late to the party usually, but when they get there, they do kind of come with the hammer.
So let me get your opinion. And unfortunately, we're going to run out of time. So we'll tease the audience with it, but they'll have to tune back in next week where we do some analysis. But, you really got me thinking about the regulatory side. And what really got my attention when we talked last week was I didn't realize that a US company, if they're selling marijuana, they can't actually be listed on TSX, NASDAQ, or NYSE. So, everyone who's out there who's curious, hey, I want to invest in an American pot grower. Well, you can't, because if you're an American pot grower, you can't be publicly listed because it's to put it bluntly, it's just not allowed right now.
Right.
Now, I saw a very interesting opportunity where literally they're called special purpose. They're called SPAC, special purpose acquisition companies. They're called blank check companies. Have you heard of those before?
No.
Okay, so let me see if I can Google what this is called. It's called a blank check company.
Okay. I'm with you Googling too.
Okay. So I found the other day, hold on, let me see. Do you see sorry, wrong screen. Sharing the wrong screen. Let's go here. A SPAC is called a blank check company. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of a blank check company is to list yourself publicly and get that shell in place so that when the company is going to go public, they can kind of, I guess, I don't want to say do the end around the SEC because that's clearly illegal, but it's essentially kind of a backdoor.
Well, so it's interesting that you talk about this. I think we briefly hit the RTOs, which are the reverse takeovers. It seems very similar to what's been going on, and it just seems that that's pretty much the way cannabis companies in the United States have been functioning. So what I mean is very similar to the RTOs, that they'll take a shell company in Canada or a company that they can basically take over in Canada that's already listed and already traded, and then they'll kind of basically take that company over, and then their company, which is this United States cannabis company, now is a Canadian traded company. So that's what they did. I believe Green Growth Brands did that in late 2018. So they took over like a Shell oil and gas company. Now, again, they can be traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, but they're traded on the Canadian Securities Exchange. So it sounds very similar to kind of what these blank check companies are doing. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm not going to spring this on you this time because obviously, literally, like I found this out. We were looking in this and we found this, I think, a day or two ago. One of our researchers showed me this and I was just like, this is awesome. But for people who are tuning in, well, first, let's see. Let's get, the comments. If you're on, do you want to look at this? Because what I want to discuss with Courtney is I have found, or not me, but I've been made aware through our team that there is a blank check US company that has been specifically created for listing cannabis acquisitions. So it's a blank check company, and it's just been kind of sitting there under the radar screen. And literally, they made an announcement about 2 months ago that I think it was maybe 2.5 months ago that there is a reverse merger coming through with a, call it picks and shovel type cannabis play that's going to occur. Wow. And their pricing right now, because it hasn't become wildly known, their pricing is still at, call it acquisition cost in terms of what the deal terms are. It's not at these like inflated valuations. And I'm teasing you a little bit because obviously I don't want to put you on the spot because you haven't done this research, but I'm going to give you the information. I think I'd really love to have a detailed discussion about this next week when we come on, because I really want to look at the deal. Like, honestly, like I'm looking at this thing and it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm like, oh, really? Interesting. I'm super.
It's pretty cool. Like, it's pretty cool. Like, well, I mean, like, let's look at it, right? In terms of what cannabis companies have gone out, right? The big one we see is Tilray.
Yeah.
So let's look at Tilray. And I'm not saying Tilray is a good or a bad company, but honestly, I'm not gonna hop on Tilray right now.
I agree.
I don't know what you would do. I mean, it's like
that's
that's
exactly.
buying when everyone else is saying, hey, let's buy, heck, I was on an Uber and my Uber driver was saying, hey, we got talking. I do cannabis stuff. Saying, hey, Tilray, I bought some Tilray. I'm like, I'm a little iffy on that when the Uber drivers.
I agree. But what? Peter Lynch has said that too. He said when everybody starts talking about, they start telling him about stock tips, he's like, oh, there's about to be a problem. And he says that I think he says it in One Up on the Wall Street. I thought that was really interesting that you said that.
It's great. But like we look at Tilray, right? Tilray has 20 million in revenue or 10 million a quarter. So they're on track for 40 million. And the company right now is worth $7.3 billion. Mm-hmm. So if you just do the math, that's like what? I don't even know what the price to revenue multiple, like that's ludicrous. That's just crazy, right? Now this company, their current market capitalization is, it basically will come out to when the deal is done and at the buy-in price, mm-hmm. The market cap, it's going to be a SaaS company. So this is a software as a service company that services the cannabis space. Mm-hmm. And the market cap on that company is going to be, I think, 6 or 7 times annual revenue.
Okay.
So if you look I'm teasing all this sort of stuff. If you look at software company valuations, mm-hmm. just in general, let me throw out Salesforce.com, because they're the big leaders. If we look at, technology, software as a service companies, Salesforce.com with $110 billion market cap trades against, 10 to 1 in terms of, or it's 11 to 1 in terms of price to revenue. And I'm not saying Salesforce.com doesn't have growth potential, because it's a great company and, it's actually in my portfolio because I also do, other things. I don't just have all my money in cannabis and crypto. Right. But this is considered more of a mature type valuation with a little bit of upside, that might be slightly overvalued because, Salesforce.com in the world of software is killing it. Mm-hmm. So this company actually is at a lower valuation multiple of Salesforce. When they go public, it's going to be very well capitalized. So it'll have about 60 million in cash in the checking account for acquisitions. And it's in the cannabis space.
I'm very excited.
It's going to be pretty cool. So I think it's about time to wrap up part 1. How to invest $1,000 and turn it into big dollars and create generational wealth. Everyone who's tuned in, thanks for tuning in. This is going to become more of a regular show. Last week, I know we just popped on at a weird time, and this time we popped on, but we had some technical difficulties, so I apologize for the delay. But it'll be Tuesdays at 3 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Central. And next week, we'll be back, and we'll get into this company that we're talking about. This should be pretty exciting.
I am excited. I am very excited.
All righty. Well, guys, hold on. Let me just stop the share. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and we will be back next week. Talk to you guys later.